Welcome to Lawyer Up with HMC, where we unravel the complexities of legal battles, share insights into high-stakes litigation, and provide strategies for navigating the legal landscape. Join us as we delve into and discuss common legal issues and interview industry professionals and experts in the field. Whether you're a legal professional, a business owner, or simply curious about the world of litigation, our podcast offers valuable knowledge and practical advice to empower you in your legal journey. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, hmclawyers.com. Now here's the host of the Lawyer Up with HMC podcast, Kristen Hagg.
Good morning, everybody. Well, I know everybody was anticipating seeing Kristen Hagg this morning. You get me, her replacement, Kirk Mason. I'm a partner at HMC Lawyers here, and I specialize in construction law and litigation-related matters. I am pleased to welcome Anton Vlooswyk of Building Envelope Engineering to join me here as our guest host or guest this morning. Welcome, Anton.
Thanks very much, Kirk.
In today's episode, we're going to be discussing issues related to building envelope engineering to give the listeners an idea as to what building envelopes are, how important and instrumental they are to risk management, and to give you some feedback or some advice from two industry experts here as to some items you may want to consider to protect your asset or to ensure that you take appropriate steps to remediate your asset if it becomes an issue for you at some point in the future. Anton, just by way of background, is the principal of Building Envelope Engineering. He is a civil engineer who has specialized as a building envelope consultant in Calgary for over 30 years. Anton has served as the director of the Alberta Building Envelope Council since 1994, and previously was a director of the National Building Envelope Council. Anton has been recognized as an expert in the field of building envelopes in Alberta and elsewhere, and specializes in leaky condos and both single family and multifamily residential units. Anton's project experience has ranged with large commercial projects as well, up to values of $1.5 billion, to, again, those single family and multifamily residential projects with construction values up to $33 million. Welcome, Anton, again. And, perhaps the best way we can start is, can we explain to the listeners what is a building envelope and why, do people have to worry about building envelopes?
That makes sense. So today we're talking mostly residential construction. We're talking single family homes, and we're also talking about multifamily homes. So it could be a townhouse or a condominium. And the best way to describe what a building envelope is in those types of buildings is it's a series of components that keeps the warm air inside and it keeps the elements outside. So, that includes snow, rain. And so if you were sort of to look at the outside perimeter of your building, it includes the roof, it includes any skylights, it includes the walls, it includes cladding, it includes windows, it includes your foundation walls, low-grade waterproofing, and even an underslab. So, we're trying to keep the elements out and the warm or cool conditioned air inside. That's the easiest way to describe it.
Which is completely fair. And when we're talking about building envelopes and the elements that may come inside, can you kind of describe what sort of damage people might see if there's various failure points in their building envelope?
Sure. Building envelope failures are typically very costly. And one of the biggest risks is that you don't necessarily see it right away. So you could end up with some snow melt, or you could end up with some rain that's penetrating into the wall assembly through the envelope, and it can fester there for a while. And most of the residential construction that we're talking about is wood frame. The wood is highly susceptible to moisture damage, and you can end up with some pretty significant damage that's happening, and you're not able to see it because it's concealed within the wall assembly. So, building envelope repairs are typically very costly and can sometimes be difficult to identify.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have a bit of a misconception, as to what or how they may be able to address building envelope issues. I know certainly from the litigation standpoint, Anton, I see a lot of clients or defendants on the other side who take the position that the municipality is responsible for investigating these issues, and ergo, why should they take these preemptive or proactive steps with people such as yourself to look at building envelopes? Can you maybe address what the role of the city or the municipality is with respect to evaluating or inspecting building envelopes throughout the course of a new build?
Definitely, and it's a very good comment because it's a very common misconception, and people seem surprised by the fact that nobody is on most projects. Aren't any individuals that are looking at the building envelope during construction. The city of Calgary, they are doing city of Calgary locally, but other jurisdictions are similar. They are coming out and they're doing inspections, but it has nothing to do with the envelope. They intentionally do not look at the building envelope. They're looking for life safety issues. So, in terms of electrical, mechanical, they do structural inspections. They'll do, railings and those types of things, but they're not looking at the building envelope. And even if you look at a condominium complex, they might have an architect involved, or they typically would, but that architect typically has a limited scope. And so, from an envelope construction standpoint, they're really not seeing how it's put together. There are some developers that will hire outside professionals, such as ourselves, other consultants. They'll hire roofing inspectors to sort of help them through the process. But I'd say on a majority of single family homes and a good portion of multifamily construction, really it's the contractor doing some QA, QC, but he's relying heavily on the subtrades doing a good job. And so you have a very important piece of the building that really no one is looking at.
Yeah, and arguably from our perspective, is probably the biggest key piece to the building construction is the building envelope, because you look at what sort of damages can flow from faulty workmanship or negligent construction. There are really sizable dollar values that you could be looking at with building envelope failures.
I completely agree, and especially when you look at the structure. Everybody recognizes the structure is extremely important. The building envelope keeps the structure dry, and when it's wood, it's key. It's something too that for most of us, our homes are a significant personal asset, and you want to preserve that asset, and the building envelope is doing that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, the irony of talking about building envelopes is a lot of people really are reluctant to spend a little bit of money on either legal or building envelope consultants, because they're looking at the present cost versus the potential future cost. And really, from my perspective, when you're dealing with what is the single biggest asset for a lot of people, you really should take some time to evaluate what you're getting into before you get into it. From our side of it, $2,000, $3,000, or $5,000 spent on the right people to review the asset might save you hundreds of thousands of dollars later on. And if you're dealing with those larger, condominium projects, it may save you millions of dollars, or exposure to, $50,000 to $100,000 of a special assessment at some future date.
I totally agree. And one of the analogies that I like to use is when people buy a used car, the first thing they do is take it to a mechanic to get some sort of an inspection done. Am I buying a good car? Because I don't understand, how it's been maintained, and is it in good condition? And yet, when you're spending money on a home, you could be 10 or 20 times the value of that car. And people often buy something sight unseen because they like the interior finishes. It has nice granite countertops. And,
yeah,
that's not the important part. And so, I think it leads really well into, what should you do if you're purchasing a home or a condominium, and you have to do some due diligence. And as you were saying, get a professional involved, and it could be a home inspector, relatively inexpensive. And, that person can at least do a preliminary walkthrough. They have pretty good insight as to what doesn't seem quite right. And if they don't see something that's quite right, they can put it in their report. And from there, you can take it and you can bring it to an expert and have them provide an opinion. And I agree, it's a small amount of money that you're paying up front to potentially save yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars down the road.
Correct. So, Anton, talk me through this a little bit, because I think the general listener probably wouldn't know. But if we're looking at best practices or best steps to take when you're doing a single family new build, for example, what would be some advice you'd give to the listeners as to what they can do to protect themselves?
Well, I'd say that there's almost two types of new builds. One would be through a volume builder, and one would be through a custom builder. And by volume builder, it's just your, large home building companies that produce hundreds of homes each year. They've really got the lowest risk because they're building certain models that they've built numerous times before. And each time they build that house, they're learning from it and they're making the next house better. And, they're also using very consistent subtrades and very proven design techniques and design concepts. And so overall, that's got a pretty low risk from a building envelope perspective. If you're building single family and it's a custom home, that's where the risk increases significantly. And the problem with it is that each custom home is a prototype. It's the first time it's been built, and you're running through it and you're figuring things out on the fly. And it's one of those things that if you look back in life, the second or third time you do something, it's always better. And so when you're building this custom family home, you're doing it for the first time and you will make mistakes. And so, that comes with some risk. The other thing is that custom home builders, a lot of really knowledgeable custom home builders out there, but there's also some that really aren't. And, a lot of them are relying on their sub-trades to figure out all of the details. So, it's the first time something's been built, two sub-trades are connecting at an interface detail, and they need to very quickly figure out what to do. And it's putting a lot of faith in the person who's holding the hammer. And sometimes that can work out, but a lot of times it doesn't, and it has quite a bit of risk. So, I'd say custom homes are tricky, and that's where it is worth getting a professional involved. And it doesn't have to be an overly exhaustive program. It's something that you can set a budget and say, this is my budget. I would like to have a few interim spot checks during construction to see if things are being put together properly. And you can hire, a roofing inspector, you can hire an envelope consultant, and they can help you through that process. And, as you were mentioning before, it can be a few $1,000s, and yet you're dealing with an asset that's hundreds and hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of dollars. And I think that's money well spent for a few checkpoints during construction.
For sure. And I think, it's becoming more common practice for you to interface with a bunch of different subtrades, architects, contractors, and consultants, on the global piece. Like 10 years ago, I don't think it was overly common for building envelope consultants to be involved throughout the course of construction. I think now it's almost best practice or accepted best practice, right? And, I don't think there's any reluctance on the part of industry to interface with building envelope consultants. And, conversely, there's no reluctance on the part of building envelope consultants to interface with market, with those people who are doing the construction. So it is, from our viewpoint, something people should embrace. I know, on the litigation stand front, if I'm dealing with a client who has an issue with their house or has a reconstruction, it's always my advice for them to engage a building envelope consultant to have that checkpoint, because you just can't, not that there's bad actors out there, but you have to be able to position people with the best QA, QC practices to give them the best shot of the rebuild. And that's having the experts like yourself involved on that, on that project.
I agree. And I was just going to add that, it's especially important in preventing the systemic issues, the issues that occur at every single window or every single penetration through cladding. You still may have a one-off issue somewhere because obviously you're not on site all the time if you're doing certain checkpoints, but at least you're going to have some confidence that the overall system and the overall design and the general intent of the design is that it's solid and sound and following good principles, and it's going to last for a long time. So I think it's money well spent, because you're talking about thousands up front versus tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands down the road.
Yeah, and that doesn't even consider what money you may have to spend on experts, whether it's engineering or whether it's litigation, to address that rebuild as well, right? I mean, totally. The reality of it is nobody, not to shoot ourselves in the foot here, but nobody wants to end up in a litigation if they don't have to, right? And we'd be doing ill by market if we didn't make recommendations to try to keep people from litigation.
Agreed.
And that has a real upfront cost. So, again, when we're dealing with people who have their single biggest assets, don't be penny wise and pound foolish, because 5,000 or 50,000 on seeking the right advice at the start may save you hundreds of thousands or more at your date.
Yeah. I think also it's really important to discuss self-managed construction projects. We're seeing more of that now, where people are saying, I can't find a builder, builders are too expensive, I'm going to build my own home by myself, coordinating the subtrades, and that comes with a lot of risk. Again, you learn from your mistakes, you learn from experience, and if you're building a house for the first time or even for the fifth time, you're still considered quite inexperienced, and you need to know what to look for. So, it's something that I would caution against. You may think you're saving money, but ultimately you're putting the responsibility of the value of your home, or a significant portion of the value, in someone else's hands. And it's very tough. And, even from a payment standpoint as well, and a litigation protection standpoint, maybe you can even allude on the prompt payment legislation in Alberta and how that relates to, self-managed construction projects too. You have to stay on top of it.
Oh, the prompt payment legislation, the sexiest piece of legislation in Alberta right now. But yeah, a lot of people don't understand it. But, effectively, if you're in any construction project as the owner, you've got to flow payments down to the general contractor or people beneath you, within a finite period, which is 28 days. So what scares me on projects, whether they're self-managed or not, is making sure that you have enough time within that 28-day period to actually evaluate that the work that has been invoiced has actually been sufficiently done, right? And again, this is why on most projects these days, I wouldn't make any qualms about recommending consultants be engaged, because you have to have that QA QC done. If you don't, under the prompt payment legislation, you can't issue the payment dispute or notice of dispute, and you can't withhold funds. So if you're doing this all as a self-managed owner, it's an almost impossible task, especially if it's your first, second, or third project, to try to understand what issues may be there, and to protect yourself under the prompt payment legislation. So
totally
really,
agree. That
really good point.
It also includes deficiencies too, because you need to be out on site on the scaffolding, seeing if there's any significant deficiencies before you're paying these contractors out. And it just comes with so much risk. So the savings better be worth it.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't appreciate too, going back to the self-managed piece, which is an interesting piece, is, if you entrust somebody else with your project, typically that construction manager or general contractor has a commercial general liability policy, and you're insured against issues that may arise with construction or with design that result in damages to the property. Arguably, if you self-manage that project, you don't have that GC commercial general liability policy to go after. You may only have the commercial general liability policies of the subtrades. So naturally, you're going to have a bit of a knockdown effect as to what you may be able to recover if there are any issues with your home. You're going to face a contributory negligence argument as to, failures that you had as a self-manage, as a self-manager of the project, if there's deficiencies with the project. So, whatever you could expect to recover is naturally going to be knocked down on account of that. So again, to your point, if you think you're going to save money, you better be pretty damn good at it. Because if you're not, you're exposing yourself even more from a litigation perspective if you have those issues that arise with your property, which almost seem like a foregone conclusion on most of the projects these days. I mean, I say there's very few, and you can certainly disagree with me, but there's very few new builds that don't have some issue arise.
I would agree. That's a fair statement.
Yeah, and I think the more practical question is, are you dealing with somebody who is a good actor or a rational actor who's going to fix it for you if that issue arises, right?
Yeah, and that's going back to the volume builder. They have a substantial portfolio and backing behind them, so they're definitely I'd say more agreeable to repairing things than sometimes a small person who doesn't have or small builder that doesn't have the resources. But sorry, go ahead.
No, and I was just going to chime in, Anton, and say, typically those small builders are the ones who will give you the better deal on some of the projects because they might only be doing one or two a year. But to your point, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily the best builder.
No. The other thing that you brought up is, insurance. And I think that's worth also discussing, just because there's a misconception in the insurance industry too, where people are thinking that, I have a leak into the building envelope. It has caused structural issues. It's caused damage to, the interior finishes, and my home insurance will cover it. And that is not correct. Most insurance policies do not cover for faulty workmanship or inadequate maintenance. They will only cover you for the consequential damages. So if you have water leaking into your unit of a condominium, you can get your ceiling repaired, and you can get your baseboard repaired, and flooring, those types of things. But the actual moisture damage to the wall assembly itself, or the cause of the moisture leakage into the wall, neither of those are typically covered by insurance policies. So again, there's a misconception where people think it's been well inspected during construction and, don't worry, I'm covered. It's not the case. For most issues, you're not.
Well, especially under their homeowner policy, right? For homeowner policies, you're right. A lot of people see damage and say, well, it has to be covered. And really the litmus test is it sudden and accidental? Because most of the homeowner policies have a continuous seepage exclusion.
Yeah.
So if you do have these building envelope failures where you've had a leaky window or a leaky balcony, and you've had water coming into your unit for 3 months, 3 years, whatever it might be, an insurer is going to look to that continuous seepage exclusion and exclude that as possible coverage. Now, that would nullify any sort of coverage under the homeowner's policy, but that doesn't necessarily nullify coverage under the CGL policy for the contractor or whoever was involved with design and construction of the property.
Exactly. Yeah. Definitely two different issues, but it was more something that I thought we should flag because it can be an issue for homeowners.
Yeah,
they're often surprised.
They are often surprised. And, the other thing to be mindful of or to talk about with homeowners too is, a lot of the times people will see a water stain on their ceiling or they'll see it on their carpet. They might ignore it. And, from our standpoint, that's the last thing you want to do. There's the Limitations Act, of course, which you and I are live to, but really your time frame to pursue any issues is 2 years from the date you knew or ought to have known of the issue, subject to a 10-year drop dead deadline from the time of initial construction. So if you see a spot for years and you don't address it, you could be potentially prejudicing any sort of claim or claim over that you might have against previous parties if you don't get that addressed. And I think, another thing to be mindful of is the impact of new home warranty, right? New home warranty, is something that again has a finite period. And maybe Anton, you can, describe what the impact is for deficiencies, building envelope, and structural under new home warranty.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's another really great point, because there's a misconception. The actual warranty period of a new home, is, in my opinion, quite short. The bumper to bumper portion is typically a year. It can sometimes be increased to 2 years. For building envelope, you're covered now up to 5 years, and structural is up to 10 years. But going back to the car analogy, if you buy a new car, you're often covered for longer on a car than you are on a home, for the bumper to bumper portion, and kind of for the mechanical portion itself too, with the building envelope. So you have to be proactive in identifying potential issues. As a homeowner, you can't just sit there and let a brown stain form on your ceiling or a piece of baseboard swell. You have to be proactive, and you don't need to be an expert to see a brown stain on your ceiling. If there's water on the floor, those types of things you need to address right away. And I think you also need to push that to the exterior too, where after a windstorm, do a walk around your place. See are there any shingles that have blown off? Are there any flashings that have blown off? After a major rainstorm, do a walk outside. See, are there any abnormal stains? Is something staying wet longer than it should be? Are there materials that are degrading prematurely because they're getting wet all of the time? Like, those are things, as a homeowner, you don't necessarily have to be an expert, but you can identify when something might be wrong, or may not be performing as per design. And then you can consult an expert and say, is this an issue or is this not an issue? But I think people need to be proactive, and it's no different whether it's single family or whether you're in a condominium. If you're in a condominium, there's nothing wrong with doing a walk around and getting some fresh air and seeing if there's something that doesn't look right, and bring it to the attention of your board or your property manager. Stand out on your deck or your balcony and take a look at the roof, or take a look at some other details and see, has anything recently been damaged, just to kind of, start that process. Because of course, you might only be doing annual reviews, or every few years if you're living in a condominium, it's some sort of a condition assessment, and a lot of things can happen between those different checkpoints. So I think be observant as a homeowner.
Yeah, and we were talking about a misconception with warranty too, and I think from the legal standpoint, what I see is a lot of clients who just assume that warranty coverage is almost guaranteed, which is not always the case too, right? No. Warranty coverage almost provides a different form of coverage than what commercial general liability coverage provides, and subject to a very specific policy cap or premium cap. And oftentimes, it's pretty easy to get to that cap with building envelope issues, and blow past that cap with building envelope issues if they're not properly addressed. So, in a lot of instances, you might have a $200,000 coverage cap, and you could be facing a $500,000 issue or a $2 million issue. So you're only going to have partial recovery. So, one of the things that people need to understand is when these issues occur, they manifest and they only get worse. They don't get better. Yeah. Right. So if you don't take steps to your point, Anton, and fix that brown stain in the ceiling, or fix that swollen baseboard, and you just leave it, chances are it's only going to get worse, and the cost to fix that's only going to get worse.
Totally agree. Investigate those sorts of issues, and you have to do maintenance to prevent those issues from happening. Maintenance is really key. It's something that a lot of people take for granted because they're upset with the initial cost. Why do I have to do this maintenance when my home is only 5 years old or 10 years old? But that maintenance is preventing the water leakage into the wall that then festers, that becomes a bigger issue. So, I think maintenance is really key, just to make sure that things are performing the way they were intended by design, that they haven't been damaged, and that you'll also get a really good understanding as to when am I going to have to replace a component, and especially a roof. A roof is a great example where most homeowners won't walk up on the roof, but it's something that you can hire somebody to do that and I think it's money well spent. They can provide a very basic report that shows some photos of typical conditions and maybe some potential issues, and then you can choose to do some maintenance, and you can also look at it and say, oh, the shingles only have 5 years left. Should I wait till year 0, or should I start to look to maintain it now? Again, just trying to mitigate some of your risk.
Yeah, and part of that discussion is, when do you start budgeting for it? And I think the answer is, as soon as you buy a home and move into a home, you start budgeting for what you need to do down the line, if you're being truly proactive. So, there's a bit of a difference, I think, when you're looking at maintenance for a single family home, which, is arguably a lot easier than your multifamily condominiums, versus the condominiums. Can you maybe describe for the listener what, a reserve fund study is? Because I think that speaks to your comment on, building out a maintenance plan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So basically, every home is going to require some maintenance, whether it's single family or multifamily. And if you're in multifamily, you're required to have a reserve fund study. And what that reserve fund study is in place for is to ensure that you have adequate funds in place to properly maintain the building as it ages. So each month you're contributing to a fund, and that fund is sort of put in place against a maintenance plan as to when things are going to need to be maintained or replaced. And you want to make sure that those two align. So you need a condition assessment that says, here's all the different components that are going to require maintenance on your condominium complex. Here are some anticipated maintenance and replacement costs at different checkpoints along the service life of the building. And then you need to make sure that the fund is going to adequately cover those maintenance repairs and the ultimate replacement repairs. So, it can be challenging, because especially if you're purchasing a new condominium, you're contributing to a fund that you won't use for quite a while down the road, or you won't use significant portions of it. But it is a very, very important piece, because you don't want to be faced with a significant maintenance cost or a significant replacement cost down the road that you can't cover. It's better to have that kitty in place that you can draw from when it's needed, rather than having to do some sort of a special assessment. So, definitely reviews, and then aligning, a fund and a payout strategy for that fund. Those two should align.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are scared off condominium fees, right? But there is a bit of a balancing act to making sure that they're high enough that they're going to adequately address that plan, right? And that, from a prospective owner or a current owner's standpoint, is something that they need to be focused on. You don't want to make sure that living there is going to be more expensive for you at the end of the day than it was at the start when you first made your ownership journey. So, if you're looking at buying a unit in a condominium, I think it's also important to have guys like yourself potentially look at the condo, or assess it, or look at the single family, if you're buying a single family residence, and assess it, and get some feedback or advice from experts as to what issues you might be facing, or what maintenance costs might be just around the corner, to make sure that you best preserve that asset.
Totally agree. It's something that industry experts can provide an opinion as to what they're seeing on other projects. So let's say your building has stucco, and there have been quite a few claims related to stucco in Alberta and moisture damage behind it. That's something that you could flag if you were purchasing a condominium unit. You, as a professional in the industry, you could review the reserve fund study. You could review the maintenance costs that are, associated with the exterior envelope, and you could see if it's fair and reasonable based on experience with similar cladding types or similar buildings, and you can provide a second opinion. So I do think if you're buying a condo unit, number one, you can do that yourself. You can see what the reserve fund study is saying. You can see what sort of maintenance has been completed, what sort of maintenance plan is in place. And then I think you can present those documents to an expert and say, does this make sense? What risk do I have down the road? And is am I getting into something that is underfunded, or is it appropriately funded?
Yeah, and good point. And that's where, cautionary tale to everybody is don't fall into that trap, especially in Calgary, where sometimes it's a battle to find real estate. Don't fall into that trap of buying real estate without conditions or giving yourself enough time to make sure that what you're buying is the right asset.
Totally.
Because, if you're putting so much money into it, the last thing you want to do is lose that money or put that money at risk, right? And there's plenty of ways for that to happen in the construction practice, which you can't always avoid, but you can implement some of these tips that we're giving the listeners to try to minimize or mitigate against that risk.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's also worth talking a little bit about if you are already a condominium owner, and it's something that you should be pressuring the board, or at least asking for some information from the board or your property manager about those types of items. And just so that you can sort of follow along in the background too, to make sure that, the money that you're contributing each month is being spent. Some of it's on actual maintenance costs now, but that it's being appropriately set aside in the future. And, I think ultimately most condominiums are going to go through some sort of a repair process as well. And I think
sure.
that's a good item to talk about too, where a lot of times what we see is that a contractor is called out to repair something. It's, we have a leak through the roof, and a contractor comes up and says, you need a new roof. A lot of condo boards will proceed to repair the roof or replace the roof with that contractor. And I think it's worth getting some professional help on those types of things too. That once you have an issue, and once an issue has been identified by a contractor, that's a good time to get a professional involved to say, is this the right repair? Is this something that is going to address the issue? Is this a single one-off type of water leak, or is it a systemic issue? Is the system at replacement, or can we still get some life out of it? So I think it's worthwhile getting a second opinion before you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars that could be not addressing the issue, or that could be wasted. You might really only be dealing with an isolated issue, but replacing something prematurely.
Yeah, and again, it's not to say that there's bad actors out there, but there's almost an unconscious bias when you're a contractor and you go to a property. If you see an issue, you want to recommend the fix, right?
Yeah.
And certainly you and I have seen many claims, and we've been on claims together, where sometimes that first review recommends the Rolls Royce of fixes, which is not necessarily the appropriate fix.
No, the easy solution is always say replace it. Start over.
Yeah, and that's not always the best solution, because from an owner standpoint, you want to make sure that you're spending the right money, and that right money is going to give you an appropriate fix. From the litigation standpoint, you don't want to be put off or put into a better position than you would have been in, because you're not going to recover those amounts if there's any sort of upgrade or unexplained improvement at your property. So, if you find yourself getting into that litigation path, you want to make sure that you have a consultant or an expert outline, what the issues are and what that appropriate fix is. And at some point in time, that individual, whether it be you or somebody else, has to be able to justify to a court or to a judge, why we followed a certain recommended repair path. And that has to directly tie to evidence of damages or evidence of deviations from building code or other governing code to warrant that repair. So I agree 100%, Anton. Be very wary of that first report and that first recommendation. Again, take your time, do the right due diligence. I always tell clients that's kind of the investigative or education phase. Spend some time there first to make sure that you've had it properly looked at, and had a proper repair plan built out, and then had a proper repair plan bid on. Because if you put that in the hands of the wrong individuals, it could be quite costly, and it may do you more harm harm them good.
Totally agree. It brings up a really good point that if you are into the repair, you've sort of done the assessment, you've established the fact that there needs to be a repair that has to happen. I think it's still important to have some professional involvement through that, because you can put together some bid documents that provide a level playing field for contractors to price, and then you can review that pricing quite easily because they're all bidding on the same scope. And then I think even through construction, it's money well spent to have somebody involved that can do those same spot checks during the repairs to make sure, did our investigation find all of the issues that need to be replaced or repaired? Is there any fine tuning or tweaking of the design that we need to do? Review some mock-ups to say, okay, this is good. This is what we need to restore the building to the design intent. And then a couple of spot checks during construction just to make sure that the workmanship stays consistent through the process, and that's the most effective way to manage the repairs. And we're not talking small maintenance repairs, but if you're doing larger window replacement programs, balcony membrane replacement programs, roofing programs, those types of things, get somebody involved, because it's a small fee up front to make sure that you're doing the right repair, spending your money wisely, and you're not going to end up with the same issue down the road.
Yeah, and really it's better for everybody, right? It minimizes risk for all actors who are involved, and most principally the owner. It should hopefully mitigate against any sort of further issue. But for contractors, lots of them embrace feedback during the course of construction. If they've missed something, most of them are prepared to go fix it and address it. The last thing they want to do is find themselves in litigation 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line as well. Right?
Totally agree. And that's our experience in the industry as well. Like we approach it as it's always a team effort. We all have the same goal. We all want a good building. We do not want to be in court.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, which is entirely fair. And quite honestly, I mean, the advice we try to structure clients is to keep them out of court.
Yeah.
Because, to go to court these days, and there will be certain occasions where you have to go, to go to court these days is a costly adventure. And it's not an adventure that a lot of people want to be party to. But, there are different avenues where, I think the listeners can implement practices or best practices to protect the asset. But those same practices can help you, recover against a commercial general liability policy or in litigation if you find yourself there. Of course, that's not the preferred avenue, but a lot of people need to appreciate that there are options for recovery. So even though you might be out of pocket in the first instance to give effect to the repairs, you might be able to recover some of that if you take the appropriate steps once you find the issue, educate yourself on the issue, and then implement an appropriate repair plan.
Agree. The construction industry is not perfect, but we're just trying to mitigate risk. Yeah.
You got it. So one last thing I want to talk on, Anton, and we've kind of danced around it, but it's all related. We've talked about observing issues. We've talked about kind of the Limitations Act with the 2-year and the 10-year, and the Alberta New Home Warranty, which is the 5-year for building envelope and 10-year for structural. But in the context of a multifamily dwelling, can you quickly, kind of detail what a technical audit is and how that could be a useful tool to protect yourself against these issues that we've talked about?
For sure. It's for the most part, it's a visual assessment. It's, taking a look at the drawings for the building if they're available, just to see what was the original design intent, see if there's any red flags based on those details. That's sort of step one. Step two would be a quick interview with the board to see what sort of issues have been reported and how those issues have been addressed. Number three, you would look at some previous maintenance documents to look at, all right, what repairs were actually completed and were those repairs effective? And so that sort of covers the background information. And then from there, you take it to a visual review where you're doing a spot check, a review from ground, seeing if there's any potential issues that just don't seem normal. stains, cracking, premature deterioration, loose components, those types of things. So you do that from ground. If it's low-rise condominium, you're doing it from some balconies. You're poking your head into the attic to see if there's any significant moisture damage in there, and you're looking at the roof. And you won't be able to access all areas, but you'll get enough to see what's happening. Is the building performing as per the original design intent, or is it falling behind? Does it need some maintenance, or does it need some repairs? And so you're not necessarily taking anything apart, but you're sort of flagging to see, is there anything else that needs further investigation? And then at that point, you can flag that and say, this might be an issue. Let's do an exploratory hole to see if it is or it isn't, and move forward from there. So I think those reviews, probably every 3 to 5 years, is reasonable for a condominium, that they're doing building envelope reviews. Roofing reviews you might want to do a little bit more frequently, just because they're constantly wet and they see a lot of water. So you might want to be doing those annually or after a storm. But I think that those types of investigations are quite useful. It just helps gives you a snapshot to make sure you're on the right path.
Yeah, and it gives you peace of mind, but it also gives you that action item if you need it to make sure that you've got coverage.
Yeah.
Under an appropriate insurance policy or new home warranty.
Exactly.
Or it just gives you, again, that QA QC check and balance, where you've got something to go back to the developer or the contractor and say, listen, we've had an expert review this. They've observed this issue. Can you go back and fix it? And a lot of the times, the developers, even though you might be past the 5-year new home warranty or the bumper to bumper warranty that we spoke about, are savvy enough and they're professional enough that they'll look to address those issues, because they ultimately want to keep their user base happy, right?
Agreed. And I've made a number of comments talking about contractors that sometimes aren't doing the right thing, but you're right, there are a lot that will do the right thing. And I think that an inspection or a review of the building just prior to expiring warranties is very important, because that's a great opportunity to go back while you're still covered and get items addressed.
100% agreed. Okay, Anton. So we've talked about a number of issues today, and hopefully tried to give the listeners, some positive steps or some positive best practices that they can implement. Can you tell our users, if they're looking to guys like yourself in Building Envelope Engineering Inc., how do they get a hold of you?
They can Google and get my contact information that way. And, I'm more than happy to answer questions as well. I talk to homeowners all the time where they have questions, and sometimes they'll just email through photos, and I want to help people. I'm a homeowner as well, and I don't enjoy costly repairs. And so I can understand that other people are in the same boat as me.
Yeah, 100%. And you're one of our most trusted experts, and it goes without saying, it's been a privilege to have you on here today. I certainly thank you for your time, energy, and commitment to doing this today, and look forward to more discussions like this at a later date.
Well, thank you very much for having me and providing the opportunity to help others in the industry.
Our pleasure, Anton. Thank you.
You've been tuning into the Lawyer Up with HMC podcast with your host, Kristen Hagg. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, hmclawyers.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.